The folder on my father's desk was the kind that held things meant to last. Thick cream cardstock, embossed with the logo of a law firm that had handled our family's affairs for 30 years. My aunt had set it at the center of the dining table like a centerpiece, flanked by the good china my mother only brought out for funerals and milestones. 40 people filled the room. My father's business partners, my mother's church friends, cousins who hadn't visited in years but somehow materialized the moment there was something to inherit. The crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier my father had installed the year the company turned its first real profit. Everyone was dressed like they were attending a celebration. In a way, they were. Just not the one they thought. My mother stood at the head of the table wearing the black dress she'd bought for my father's memorial 3 months ago, and somehow that felt right. She tapped her glass. The room went still. She said that my father had always believed in legacy, that the company he built from a single leased truck and a handshake contract 30 years ago deserved to be guided by someone who understood what it meant to carry a family name. She said she had spent these months since losing him thinking about what he would have wanted. Then she reached into that cream folder and laid a single document flat on the table. She announced that as of that evening, full ownership and operational control of Hargrove Logistics would be transferred to my brother. The applause started before she finished the sentence. My brother stood up, his collar too tight, his smile too wide, the way he always looked when something was being handed to him. His wife covered her mouth with both hands. Tears. Actual tears. My aunt started clapping first, which meant everyone else followed. My mother looked around the room with the expression of a woman who had just corrected a great injustice. Proud, certain, righteous. She didn't look at me. I was sitting 4 chairs away. I had built the division that accounted for 62% of that company's current revenue. I had spent 7 years as its in-house counsel, restructured 3 contracts that saved it from insolvency, and quietly, methodically, over the last 26 months, purchased controlling interest in it through a holdings entity my mother didn't know existed. She wasn't handing my brother a company. She was handing him a trap I had already finished building. I didn't move. I didn't set down my water glass. I just watched my brother shake hands with men who had once dismissed him as the son who coasted, watched his wife lean over and grip his arm like she was steadying herself against a wind only she could feel. My mother was saying something else now. Something about continuity, and family, and vision. I stopped tracking the words. I was watching my brother's hands. They were already reaching for the folder. Before I tell you how I dismantled everything they built in that room without raising my voice above a conversational tone, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to know how far this story reaches. My name is Naomi. I'm 31 years old. My mother would describe me as the daughter who became a lawyer instead of a person, which is her way of saying I chose precision over performance. My father, in his better moments, called me the one who read the fine print. He meant it as a compliment. He just never applied it to himself when it mattered. I passed the bar at 24, went straight into corporate law, spent 4 years at a firm that handled mergers and intellectual property disputes for mid-sized companies, and then came home when my father's health started declining, and the company needed someone who understood what the contracts actually said. My brother had been nominally in charge of operations for 2 years by then. What that meant in practice was that he approved purchase orders and attended the quarterly dinners with the account managers, while I rebuilt the compliance infrastructure from scratch and negotiated the freight contracts that kept the lights on. He was visible. I was necessary. There is a difference, and in a family like mine, only one of those things gets rewarded. My mother had a framework for the world, and in it, my brother was the heir. Not because he had earned it, because he was older, because he was a son, and because in her mind, a business was a thing you passed down like a last name, not a thing you earned through 7 years of 70-hour weeks. I understood this about her long before that dinner. I had stopped needing her to be different. I had simply started planning accordingly. 14 months before my father died, I came home from a meeting with an estate attorney and sat in my car in the driveway for a long time. My father had told me, privately, that he intended to split ownership evenly between my brother and me. He said he was going to update the documents. He said a lot of things in those last years that never made it, from intention to paper. I had learned, by then, not to rely on intentions, so I started doing what I knew how to do. I read everything. I found the gaps, and I started filling them quietly, legally, and completely on my own terms. Hargrove Logistics had 4 minority shareholders outside the family. 2 were original partners from my father's early years who had stepped back but kept their stakes. 1 was a freight broker who had taken equity in lieu of fees during a lean year. The last was a silent investor who had come in 6 years ago when the company needed a capital infusion. None of them were emotionally attached to their shares. All of them were interested in a fair price. Over 26 months, through my Holdings LLC, I bought them all out. Not fast enough to trigger notice. Not in a way that touched the main operating account or required my mother's signature. By the time my father passed, I held 53% of Hargrove Logistics. My family held the remainder, split between my mother's personal stake and the shares she assumed would pass intact to my brother. She could transfer her shares. She could transfer my father's shares, which were now passing through probate under a will that had not been updated, but she could not transfer majority control, because she didn't have it. She also couldn't transfer the operational assets, because those were tied to a management agreement that required the consent of the majority shareholder, which was me. What she had placed in that folder was a document that looked like a transfer of the company. What it actually was, once you read past the first page, was a personal guarantee my brother would be signing. A guarantee that made him individually liable for the outstanding commercial debt the company carried, which at that moment sat at $2.8 million in deferred equipment financing and a restructured line of credit I had negotiated specifically in a form that required personal guarantor signature to modify or dissolve. I had not forged anything. I had not deceived anyone in the room. I had simply structured things, over years, in a way that meant the trap was already set before they ever decided to spring it. My mother found me near the hallway that led to my father's study. She had a way of appearing at my elbow that she had perfected over 30 years, fingers curling around the sleeve of my blazer with a grip that was less an affectionate touch and more a redirection. She steered me out of the sightline of my aunt and my father's oldest partner and pressed me against the wall beside the bookcase like she was confiscating something. "You need to smile," she said. "People are watching." "I am smiling," I said. "You know what I mean." She kept her voice low, that particular register she used for conversations she intended to win. "This is important. Tonight is important. Your brother needs this." I looked at her. She was wearing my father's watch on her right wrist. She had started doing that after the memorial and I had never commented on it. I thought about commenting on it now and decided against it. I said, calmly, that what she had placed in that folder was not a straightforward transfer. Her expression shifted, said, "Not guilt. Something closer to preemptive offense." She said she had worked with the family attorney. She said everything had been reviewed. She said my father would have wanted this. I said my father had told me, specifically, that he wanted to divide the company equally. She made the sound she made when she considered that conversation already closed. "He said a lot of things," she told me. "He didn't always understand what was practical. Your brother has a family. He has 2 children. He has built his life around the expectation of taking this over. You have your firm. You have your career. You have options he doesn't have." She paused. She had the expression of a woman about to say something she considered generous. "You will be fine, Naomi. You have always been fine. That's exactly why I need you to let him have this." There it was. The logic I had grown up inside of, turned over so many times I could have recited it back to her in her own cadence. My competence was the justification for my exclusion. My ability to survive had always been treated as proof that I didn't need protecting, which meant I didn't need to be considered, which meant everything could be redirected to the person who had spent his life performing a more recognizable kind of need. I thought about my father's face the last time I sat with him in that study. The way he had gripped my hand and said, "You're the one who kept it running. You know that." The way he had fallen asleep mid-sentence because the medication made it impossible to stay awake. The way the updated will he had asked the attorney to draft had never been executed because he ran out of time, and the attorney had never followed up, and my mother had not reminded anyone, and the original document was the one that controlled. "I am not fine," I told my mother. "And what is in that folder is not what you think it is." She reached into her jacket pocket and produced a pen. She held it out to me. "I need you to go back in there and support your brother. I need you to shake his hand. I need you to show this family that we are unified." She looked at me with the exact expression she had used to send me to school on the morning of my father's first hospitalization because she hadn't wanted to disrupt the appearance of normalcy. The expression that said her version of events was the one that counted. "Whatever you think you know," she said, "let it go. For one night. For your father." I looked at the pen. I thought about the document waiting on that table. About my brother's hand moving toward it with the certainty of a man who had never once considered that the ground might not be solid. I took the pen. "Let's go back in," I said. "You're right. He should sign it." Relief moved across her face so fast it was almost involuntary. She thought she had won something. She thought the conversation in the hallway had done its work, and I had been, once again, talked down from the edge of making a scene. She touched my arm in the way she touched my arm when she wanted me to understand that she was being patient with me, and she walked back into the dining room ahead of me with her shoulders straight. My brother was still standing at the head of the table. The folder was open in front of him, the document visible, a pen already uncapped in the hand of my father's oldest partner, who was apparently planning to witness the signing. My brother's wife was refilling her own champagne glass. My aunt was telling someone a story I couldn't hear. I walked up beside my brother. He looked at me with the expression he'd had since we were children, the cautious watchfulness of a person who knows he has been given something he didn't entirely earn and is waiting to find out the cost. I smiled at him, the particular smile I used in depositions when the other side had just handed me exactly what I needed. I told him it was a big moment. I told him he should read the full document before he signed, because that was what our father always said. My brother laughed in the way people laugh when they think caution is a formality. He said he trusted the attorney. He said everything had been reviewed. He picked up the pen. I said, quietly enough that only he could hear, that the second page had a personal guarantor clause tied to the outstanding commercial debt. He stopped. He looked at me. I said, $2.8 million, personally guaranteed the moment you sign as sole principal. If the company underperforms in the next 18 months, that liability comes to you directly. Not to the company. To you. His face went through several things in rapid succession. Confusion, then the particular irritation of a man who doesn't want to believe something inconvenient, then a flicker of something closer to fear. He looked at the document. He turned to the second page. He found the clause on line 14. I watched his eyes move across the language the way people read things they aren't prepared to understand, looking for a way to make it mean something else. What is this? He said. His voice was too loud. My aunt stopped talking. Two people across the table looked up. My mother appeared at his shoulder. It's standard language, she said, without having looked at the page. The attorney said, It is not standard, I said. I kept my voice level. It is a personal guarantor clause that transfers liability for $2.8 million in commercial debt to whoever signs as sole principal. That clause was not in the original draft. It was added in the revision that came back from the family attorney's office 4 days ago. I have the original draft and the revision in my files. The room was going quiet the way rooms go quiet when people realize something real is happening. My mother said my name, the warning version. I said, still at the same volume, that I was not trying to make a scene. I was trying to make sure my brother understood what he was signing. Because if he signed that document as drafted, he would be personally on the hook for a debt that was structured specifically in a form that couldn't be assumed by an LLC or discharged through the company's operations without triggering early repayment penalties. And because the company's majority ownership had already passed, through a valid legal transaction, to an entity that his signature would have no authority to override. My brother said, What entity? I said, My Holdings LLC, which has held 53% of Hargrove Logistics for 11 months. The silence in that room was not the silence of a party. It was the silence of a building settling after something structural has shifted. My mother grabbed the edge of the table. That is not possible, she said. Her voice had lost the register she used to control rooms. She sounded the way she sounded when she was frightened and covering it with certainty. Your father's shares are currently in probate, I said, under the original will, which predates any restructuring. The minority stakes I purchased were from shareholders outside the family. I didn't touch your shares. I didn't touch my father's. I bought the ones that were available, at fair market value, through a transaction that was filed and documented. If you'd like, I can show you the closing statements. My brother put the pen down. He put it down the way a person puts down something they have realized is not what it appeared to be. Careful, and too late. His wife said, from across the table, her voice carrying the bright edge of a woman whose certainty had just developed a crack. What does that mean? What does that mean for tonight? It means, I said, that the document on this table cannot transfer operational control of the company, because the person signing it doesn't hold majority ownership. It means the personal guarantor clause would attach to him with nothing to back it, and it means that whoever revised the original transfer document to include that clause. I looked at my mother when I said this, not as an accusation but as a statement of fact the room could evaluate for itself, may want to speak to an attorney about what that revision constitutes. My mother looked at me with the expression I had seen one other time in my life, the night I told her I was leaving for law school, and she realized that the version of my future she had been planning around was not the one I was living. It was not anger, exactly. It was the recognition that the story she had been telling herself had been running on a track that didn't exist. You did this, she said. Her voice was flat. You set this up. I built a company that was failing when I came home, I said. I restructured contracts. I managed compliance. I bought out shareholders at prices they were satisfied with. I did everything in writing. I did everything legally. I didn't touch anything that belonged to you or to Dad's estate. I just made sure that if someone tried to give away what I built, they would find out, very specifically, that it wasn't theirs to give. My father's oldest partner, who had been holding the uncapped pen this whole time, set it down quietly on the table. He looked at my brother. He looked at my mother. He looked at me. He said, gently, that it seemed like this family had some things to discuss privately. My brother's wife started crying. Not the happy tears from 30 minutes ago. My aunt had her phone out. Several of my father's business associates were looking at each other with the careful expressions of people who are deciding how much of this to remember. My brother said my name. Just my name. The way he said it when we were children and he had done something that had unraveled, and he needed someone to help him find the thread. There had been a time when I would have helped him, when I would have absorbed the damage and rearranged myself to make the situation livable, because that was what I had been trained to understand as love. I thought about the morning my father told me I was the one who kept it running. I thought about driving to 4 different closing meetings in the same week, managing due diligence on a freight contract while handling my father's specialist appointments, eating lunch in my car in parking garages because there wasn't time to sit down. I thought about every year I had been told, in one form or another, that my competence was a resource the family was entitled to extract without acknowledging. I thought about the folder on that table, and the clause on page 2, and the fact that it had been added without my knowledge or signature, and what that meant about what this family had assumed it could do with my life. I said, to my brother, I'm not going to let you sign that document, not because I want to hurt you, because it would hurt you, and you didn't write it, and you deserve to know what you're actually holding. That's not a gift. That's a liability dressed up as a legacy. To my mother, I said, I am not going to litigate this tonight. My attorney will contact the estate attorney on Monday. We are going to have a full accounting of the probate assets, and a conversation about the LLC, and what transition looks like from here. I am willing to have that conversation. I am willing to find an arrangement that is fair, but I am not willing to be managed out of what I built. My mother opened her mouth. She had the expression of a woman who had never once considered that one of her children might decline to be placed where she put them. I stepped back from the table. I picked up my bag. I said, to the room in general, that I was sorry to have interrupted the evening, and that the food was very good, and my father would have been glad to see so many people who cared about him. Then I walked through the dining room, past the good china and the crystal glasses and the 40 people who were deciding, in real time, what story they were going to tell about what they had just witnessed. My mother followed me to the front hallway. She was not begging yet. She was still in the phase where she was trying to reframe. She said that I was being vindictive. She said I was punishing my brother for something that wasn't his fault. She said my father would have been devastated to see me do this to the family. I stopped at the door. I turned around. I said, Dad told me, the last coherent conversation we had, that I was the one who kept it running. He knew. He just ran out of time to do anything about it. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just finished rearranging myself to make other people comfortable. She said, You owe this family. I looked at her. I looked at my father's watch on her wrist. I thought about how much I had loved him, and how much I had needed him to see me clearly, and how he had, in his own limited way, tried, and how it had never quite been enough, and how I had spent years grieving that while simultaneously doing the work anyway. I said, I don't owe anyone the company I built, and I think you've known that for a long time. I opened the door. The night air was cold in the particular way November air is cold in the Midwest, clean and final and without apology. I walked to my car. I sat in it for a moment before starting the engine, not because I was shaking, though my hands were doing something adjacent to shaking, but because I wanted to feel the specific texture of the silence. It was not the silence of absence. It was the silence of a decision that had fully arrived. I had not destroyed my family. I had declined to disappear inside it, which is a different thing, even though it doesn't always feel different from the outside. I drove to my apartment. I poured myself a glass of water because I had barely touched anything at the dinner, and I was, suddenly, very tired in the way you get tired when something you have been carrying for a long time has finally been set down. I sat at my kitchen table with the water and my phone, and the quiet. My phone lit up 3 times. My brother, my mother, my aunt. I looked at all 3 notifications. I put the phone face down. There would be a conversation on Monday. There would be attorneys and probate filings and a negotiation about what the transition would look like. My brother would probably get a role in the company, because despite everything I was not interested in burning down what my father had loved. I would get the acknowledgement, in writing and in practice, that I had majority control, and the operational decisions would follow from that, and the personal guarantor clause would be removed from any document that crossed my desk, and eventually things would reach an equilibrium that was honest in a way none of us had managed to be before. But that was Monday. Tonight, I sat at my kitchen table and I thought about my father, about the way he had taught me to read contracts before I knew what a contract was. Sitting at this same table in the house I grew up in, going through the language with a yellow highlighter and telling me that the thing that always mattered was what something actually said, not what someone told you it meant. He had taught me that without knowing it would be the tool I used to protect myself from the decisions he hadn't finished making. I thought about the last thing he said to me that I knew he meant, that I was the one who kept it running. I thought, I know. I thought, I still am. The silence in my apartment was mine entirely, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the specific weight of waiting, not for recognition, not for fairness, not for someone to look up from the table and finally see what I had been doing this whole time. I had stopped waiting. I had started building. There is a difference between those 2 things that took me a long time to understand. Waiting is a posture. Building is a practice. Waiting assumes that what you need will be given. Building assumes that you are the one responsible for what gets made. I had made something. It was mine. No document in a cream folder. No announcement over good china. No room full of people ready to applaud the wrong name could change that. I finished my water. I went to bed. I slept better than I had in months.